They called it unstoppable, a war machine forged in blood, steel, and freezing winds. When the Soviet steamroller began to move, it didn't stop until it crushed the might of the Nazi war machine beneath its treads. This is the raw, uncensored story of how the Red Army turned the tide of World War II, not with finesse, but with sheer terrifying force. Operation Barbarossa. Hitler unleashes over 3 million German soldiers into the Soviet Union in the largest invasion in human history. Blitzkrieg tactics had crushed Poland, France, and much of Europe. But in the East, they would meet something entirely different. Something they didn't understand. Something they couldn't stop. The Germans called it Der Rote Dampflos, the Red Steamroller. At first, it looked like another Nazi victory. Within months, the Wehrmacht had reached the outskirts of Moscow. Soviet cities were falling. Millions of Red Army troops were killed or captured. Stalin, shocked by the betrayal, issued a chilling command: not one step back. What followed was a transformation. A nation brutalized by purges and famine suddenly became a war factory. Entire industries were dismantled and moved east, far beyond the reach of German bombers. Cities like Chelyabinsk and Sverdlovsk became industrial monsters, pouring out tanks, artillery, and ammunition by the hour. And then came the winter. The German advance froze literally. Engines seized. Guns wouldn't fire. Soldiers died by the tens of thousands in the snow, unprepared for the Russian cold. Meanwhile, the Soviets had been here before. They were hardened, and they struck back with fury. The Red Army, once considered broken, now returned with massed artillery barrages, wave assaults, armored formations that swallowed entire divisions. In December 1941, the counteroffensive around Moscow shocked the world. The Nazis had been stopped, and it was only the beginning. The heart of the Soviet steamroller wasn't just its machinery, it was its people. Stalingrad, a city that became a symbol of unbreakable resistance, the Soviets fought not just for survival, but for revenge. Street by street, building by building, sniper by sniper, they turned the Nazi advance into a slaughterhouse. Names like Vasily Zaitsev became legends. And when the German Sixth Army was encircled, it marked a turning point in the entire war. But the steamroller didn't stop. With every victory, Soviet tactics evolved. They began using Maskarovka deception, camouflage, misinformation to confuse the Germans. Entire fake armies were built to mislead enemy generals. When the Battle of Kursk erupted in 1943, the largest tank battle in history, the Soviet forces were ready. They had laid over 500,000 mines, dug miles of trenches. And when the Nazis attacked, the Red Army crushed them with superior strategy, numbers, and raw firepower. By 1944, it wasn't just defense. It was conquest. A name that doesn't get the same attention as D-Day, but in terms of scale, it was even bigger. Over 2 million Soviet troops launched a coordinated assault that wiped out Germany, its Army Group Center, one of Hitler's strongest formations. In just 2 months, the Red Army advanced over 300 miles, liberating Minsk and shattering the Eastern Front. The Soviet war machine had become unstoppable. T-34 tanks rolled across Eastern Europe like phantoms. IL to Sturmovik, aircraft nicknamed flying tanks, pounded enemy lines. Soviet artillery unleashed Stalin as organs, the infamous Katyusha rocket launchers that filled the air with a terrifying wail before devastating everything in their path. But the cost was immense. Every inch of land was paid for in blood. Estimates suggest over 27 million Soviet citizens, soldiers, and civilians died in the war. Cities were reduced to ash. Families were shattered. And yet, they kept pushing forward. As they reached Eastern Europe, the Red Army's vengeance became darker. The horrors of Nazi occupation, mass executions, starvation, cruelty had left scars. Now, Soviet soldiers, filled with rage and grief, turned those horrors back onto Germany. Berlin was the final target. In April 1945, the Soviet flag flew over the Reichstag. The journey from retreat to victory had taken 4 brutal years. The Soviet steamroller had started as a desperate response to invasion. It ended as the force that broke the back of Nazi Germany. But the world rarely saw the full picture. Western narratives often focus on D-Day, on the American and British efforts in France and Italy. But in truth, it was the Soviet Union that bore the brunt of the war against Hitler. 4 out of 5 German soldiers killed in World War II died on the Eastern Front. The Red Army wasn't just one of many allied force, it was the decisive force. And what made it so unstoppable wasn't just numbers, it was adaptation, a brutal will to win. From the factories of the Urals to the scorched plains of Ukraine, from the ruins of Leningrad to the heart of Berlin, the Soviet Union learned, evolved, and struck back with terrifying momentum. This wasn't a clean war. It was mud, blood, snow, and fire. It was uncensored, raw, human. Soldiers fought with bayonets, Molotov cocktails, and sheer will. Women flew night bombers under the cover of darkness, the night witches. Teenagers drove tanks. Grandmothers made bullets. The entire nation became a weapon, and that weapon rolled west, grinding everything in its path. Today, much of the story has faded, filtered through the lens of Cold War politics and modern headlines. But the truth remains. Without the Soviet steamroller, World War II would have ended very differently. This is the uncensored, full-color story of the Eastern Front, a tale not of heroes or villains alone, but of survival, sacrifice, and unimaginable force. The Soviets didn't just fight back, they rolled over the Reich, and history was never the same again.